Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wine, Women, and Words. I am Michelle, and with me, of course, is Diana.
Hello.
And today is just going to be a science fiction day because we are going to be talking about More Perfect with author Temi Oh. And thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to have you here.
I'm very excited to be here.
So, for our listeners who may not yet be familiar with More Perfect, can you give us an overview of what the story is about?
Yeah, so it's set in a near future where most people, especially young people, have opted to have an implant that connects their brain to the internet and also gives them access to other people's dreams and memories. And in the UK, the government are planning a referendum on whether or not this technology should be compulsory. And on one side are the neo-Luddites, who are kind of basically like committing acts of terrorism around the city in protest of this technology. And on the other side are people who work for this company or just have enjoyed all of the benefits of this implant called the Pulse. They believe that once we can save all of our memories on the cloud, we'll effectively be immortal, and that like collapsing the boundaries between identity will like lead to radical empathy and love for humanity. And I have two characters who are on either side and fall in love with each other.
So I've gotten really this year, especially, I've gotten really into science fiction. And one thing that's so fun slash scary, depending on what we're talking about, is how realistic it can be. Now, the idea for the story doesn't sound, too far off from out or too far beyond the realm of possibility with technology. What was your research process like while you were creating the technology for your world in More Perfect?
Yeah, so sort of my principle is normally I'll try and look at something that's similar to something that I've seen done, and then the fiction comes in where where we live in a world where all of the sort of technical hurdles have been overcome and logistical. Now everyone has this thing. So I sort of did that with my first novel about interstellar space travel. And yeah, for this one, I wanted, my background is in neuroscience. I studied it as my undergraduate degree. So I wanted to have a novel that allowed me to explore a lot of the questions that it provoked when I was studying it. That was sort of like a lot of the inspiration for the book.
So if I remember reading your website correctly, have you, or your first novel, which is Do You Dream of Terror 2, you wrote that while you were in university, was that correct?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, sort of like holidays and evenings. Yeah. Yeah.
So now what was the writing process like for this novel, as you just mentioned, going back and revisiting some of the questions that you had while you were studying and writing a completely different novel, just kind of going back and returning to some of those questions?
Yeah. I think I definitely found, I think this is maybe when I talk to a lot of authors, they say the second book is a lot more stressful, I guess, because it always feels like it runs on like a different fuel with my first novel. And especially because I was doing a science degree, fiction just felt like such a wonderful escape. It was just like a lot of joy, I think, went into it. Whereas my second novel is sort of like, it was in the middle of the pandemic and I was balancing a full-time job. And the subject matter is a lot darker. It's a retelling of the like tragic myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. So I think writing it sort of, I was in a darker place, but then it helped me to, I was thinking, it helped me to work through a lot of the questions that I had been thinking about. Like my main characters two of the characters get married. And I was thinking about how marriage is kind of a merging of identities and memories. Like there are stories that my husband's told me so often that when I talk to his brother and his brother says the memory differently, I'm like, that's not the way that it was. was thinking about kind of like an old institution that is sort of the merging of identities and memories, and then this sort of like new kind of sci-fi way of exploring the same questions. Yeah. So I think writing it, I tried to sort of embody different ideas, different and different arguments, the sort of like pro-tech argument and the what is the technology doing to us argument as well. So yeah, that was enjoyable.
That's one conversation we've had with many authors, is the second novel conversation.
Yeah.
And how different of an experience writing the second, or finding the idea for the second novel, or writing the second novel, or getting the second novel published. That entire journey is completely different from your debut novel.
Yeah, I always think about like in The Secret History, the book by Donna Tartt, the narrator says like, this is the only story I'll ever be able to tell. And like I had that in my head for ages when I finished my first novel. Like, is that the only story I'll ever be able to tell? Like, yeah, I think it is. Yeah, it's different with a debut novel. You sort of feel like you put all of your life into it. Like, and I felt with my second, like, oh, I have to live more life before I have enough life to put into another novel. But I feel like now that I've like passed that hurdle, yeah, maybe I've found like ways of incorporating writing or like creativity into my life in a sort of more sustainable way. So hopefully, this is me telling myself the next one won't be so hard. Yeah.
Now, this is slightly off topic, but we have to talk about it a little bit because we have a huge Doctor Who fan in Diana,
Oh,
and you have written Doctor Who
oh
stories as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
So I think we have to have create a small moment for Doctor Who here.
Oh, I had so much fun writing that story. I actually also, because I was writing it in the middle of More Perfect, and in More Perfect, someone like, I think a lot about like free will, and if you know you're going to do something, can you do something differently? And like in More Perfect, one of my characters is arrested for an act of terrorism he's going to commit in the future. And in my Doctor Who story, I was quite interested in Davros, the sort of villain. And I was imagining him younger, seeing a premonition of the kind of person he'd be when he was older, and thinking, I won't be. No. I'm going to do it differently. I'll do it differently. But then obviously we know that he won't. So I really enjoyed that. Though the stressful thing about writing a Doctor Who, there's so much that's obviously like so much lore and world building. It's not just the TV shows, it's like podcasts and short stories. So I spent like a lot of time just having to go through like Doctor Who Wikipedia page to try and find references for anything I said happened. But yeah, it is really fun, I think, writing in other people's worlds. So I'll be I also got to write for Black Panther and cool. Overwatch as well. So yeah, hopefully I'll get another chance to do that.
But I mean, when we're talking about like the canon, see, this is how nerdy I'm getting. Doctor Who canon, Doctor Who's been around since the 60s.
Yeah.
So we're talking like they're coming up on their 60th anniversary, is it? I lost track.
Yeah, I don't know.
They're coming, and that's just for the TV show, and there's so much that you have to kind of navigate. I can imagine being a creative and wanting to go where the story takes you, but it's like you've got this basically Bible that says, no, you can't go that way, because
it's surprisingly academic for that reason. And there'd be things that I'd mentioned briefly, and then the editor would sort of like liaise with the BBC, and they would say, oh well, no, like this kind of plant probably doesn't grow on the planet that Davros is from, so you need to change it. Yeah, it was very like, it felt like I had to like try and like defend anything I said with sources. Yeah.
And those sources are like other canon that you have to go back.
Yeah. Yeah, I ended up like trying to access this like radio play about Davros from the past, and then they were like, well, can we really use the things that they say in the radio play as reference? Is it really canon? So yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I can imagine the radio play being, this is me going even more nerdy. I can imagine the radio play technically being canon in that case, because if it's not, then what are they have the audio stories that are depicting.
Yeah, so yeah, at one there were just differing opinions on like whether or not I could use it as a source or not. I was hoping that I could, because it took a while to track down. But yeah, it's called Davros if anyone's looking. They were amazing. They were sort of these audio plays about Davros and his like childhood and how he becomes Davros. And his family, and it was very, very interesting.
And it's such an interesting concept, because whenever you talk about time travel mythology and any kind of work, there's always an element of, okay, are you going to go back in time and kill Hitler? That's always the ethical question that is posed to anybody who's talking about time travel in any kind of fictional world.
Yeah, so I was also thinking about that, because there's one episode of Doctor Who where Doctor Who goes back in time and he rescues a boy, or I think he sees a boy in peril, and he's like, obviously like his instincts are to help him, and then he's like, what's your name? And the boy's like, Davros, and he's like and then sort of the whole episode is like, should he help him, should he not help him? So I quite like the idea that like him helping him somehow made Davros. So I was sort of like trying to think of a way of like plotting his emotional arc, that like it was somehow Doctor Who time traveling into his childhood that made him the man that he was. Yeah.
Interesting, because then at the other side, if he didn't help him, he could also be a much worse version of Davros too. Which, here I am. So going all nerdy.
Welcome to the Doctor Who podcast. Or the Wine Women Words podcast for Doctor Who. But I when I saw that on your website, I was like, oh, we absolutely have to, just for a few minutes, we can't let that go. So, and I know we mentioned your first novel, Do You Dream of Terror 2, which I absolutely have to read because it sounds amazing. The emphasis was completely different in science fiction. That was, as you mentioned, interstellar space travel, and this was more technology sci-fi. Besides the themes being completely different, did you approach creating the novel any differently for such different aspects of science fiction?
I think, well, I did a lot less research with More Perfect. It was a mixture of like feeling comfortable with the subject matter, but then also I kind of knew how little we know about the brain, and I knew what I wanted to do, which are things like I wanted to have like a machine that allows you to code dreams, and a quartz disc that saves your memories that you can load into other machines. And obviously like there isn't anything like that really exists. So I think I felt like I had a lot more freedom. I'm comfortable with sort of biology, but physics I always found like quite challenging. Physics is a lot to do with sort of underlying space travel. So yeah, I think I was a lot more rigorous and I think like stressed out about research when it came to my first book than my second book. Yeah.
And you already kind of answered this question, but in one of my research rabbit holes while I was reading, because there were many, I found that two of your main characters have names that are associated with myths and legends. And you had mentioned that this is a retelling of Orpheus, which comes from Greek mythology. And I found a few articles about Meremi, who was a 12th century Yoruba queen. Were there connections? Like, was that a deliberate selection for those two names for your characters, or was that kind of a happy accident?
Well, so I knew that I wanted to write Orpheus and a story about Orpheus and Eurydice, but Moremi in my book is a Nigerian woman, and it didn't, and her sisters are called Halima and Ziba. It didn't make a lot of sense that she would be called Eurydice, which is obviously like a European name. So I was really stuck. I was kind of trying to think of different names. It was actually my dad who suggested Moremi, and he was like, this is the myth, you know, she's this queen. Her story seemed amazing. I loved how powerful she was, and especially because in my story it's kind of a reversal. As soon as I knew I wanted to write an Orpheus and Eurydice story, and Orpheus and Eurydice is like a story where Orpheus saves his wife from death by going into the underworld and fails, I wanted to do it. It seemed clear to me it would definitely be Eurydice saves Orpheus. So I quite liked that she had this name that was a character who was like a hero in her own right. And then also phonetically, I thought Moremi, Eurydice sounded quite similar as well. So yeah, those are sort of the reasons that I chose it.
The things that authors think of, like the logic that goes into certain decisions, it always blows me away how nitpicky we can get with our own either choices for our characters, but you know, that thing, like, well, there's similarities in
names are a big thing for me. There's apparently saying nomen est omen, name is destiny, and I think being a writer makes me believe that. I used to have this sense that like my characters knew their names, so I just like go through different name books until I felt like the character was going, that's my name. And I don't know, often I find out sort of happy coincidences, like that the name has a meaning that's similar to like their role in the plot. So I'm quite like sort of mystical about it. And spend a lot of time thinking about names. I find it hard to move forward before I've got the right one. Yeah.
Thank you for putting into words what I was trying to say and was failing terribly. I swear words are my friend. So I know we are just coming up on our time here, and you have places to be, so we won't keep you any longer, but More Perfect is, oh gosh, my brain just blanked. Is it out in the world yet, or is
so in the US it actually came out on Tuesday, so that's exciting. Oops, sorry.
Congratulations. So it is out in the world, and if anyone would like to order their own copy, please be sure to visit our show notes. You can click on the link to our bookshop on bookshop.org. As always, bookshop.org supports our incredible writers. It supports the podcast, but most importantly, it supports all the wonderful indie bookstores out there. And Temi, thank you so much for making time for us. We've had so much fun chatting with you, and I'm going to have to look up your Doctor Who story now. And Do You Dream of Terra too, because they both sound so good.
Oh, thank you so much. It was great to talk to you, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Oh, goodbye.
Bye.